It's basically a shotgun blast, and they're trying to just see what sticks against the wall. When they rip out some margin out of some imaginary place that you didn't think there was more margin to spare, where are they taking it from? They're taking it from the supplier, not the consumer. This thing is free to the consumer. There is some moderation, which is appropriate in every platform, but they've taken what's appropriate, gone all the way to the end of the extreme, and then jumped off the cliff. It's not even close. Every day there is a new development when it comes to antitrust. I don't even know where to start. So at the end of the day, you got to take a lot of shots. And basically what you're seeing happening right now is you are seeing the U.S. legislative, regulatory, and judicial all just take their best shot at these tech monopolies. It's basically a shotgun blast, and they're trying to just see what sticks against the wall. Is that the best approach? I don't know. Some could argue yes or no, but we have a very fragmented system with a lot of different disparate players. And so I don't think it's realistic to kind of have one big grand coordinated scheme amongst all of them. Net, I am very positive about all these different developments that are coming about. I think they are hitting on the right issues. They could be a little bit more tactful and focused in how they bring the case together. But because they are getting so many reps at it, I think eventually they'll get there. Let's start with some of the bad news, which I think is a good example about some of the missteps. But then the bad news comes out one day, and like literally the next day, there's more suits being filed. I mean, it's crazy the amount of activity going on right now. So right before July 4th weekend, Big Tech wins two battles and fight with U.S. antitrust enforcers. Facebook won two big fights with antitrust enforcers as a federal judge threw out two lawsuits against it this week. In a stunning defeat, Judge James Boasberg said the FTC, which had sued Facebook in December, asking that Facebook be forced to sell WhatsApp and Instagram, failed to show that Facebook had monopoly power in the social networking market, among other problems. What was the misstep here, right? So, again, while it's valiant to try and go after them for buying WhatsApp and Instagram, Facebook was a very different company all the way back then. They had nowhere near the amount of dominance that they have today that they did back then. Instagram is very tough. That was like over a decade ago they bought that thing. WhatsApp is a little closer to home. You know, it's not as long ago as Instagram, but still, it was a while ago. Now, and then the other bit of this is that they're generally trying to make the case that Facebook is a monopoly and tie that back to the consumer. This is the common red herring that everyone keeps chasing, because when you think about WhatsApp and Facebook, think about the producers, not the consumers. Who are the producers on WhatsApp and Facebook? Yes, it's some of the same people, but the Facebook Instagram tie to the producer is much closer, right? And you think about how these tech platform monopolies take advantage of their customers. They take advantage of producers, not consumers. They take advantage of producers first. These are suppliers. On Amazon, it's third-party sellers. On Facebook and Instagram, it's content creators. On WhatsApp, it's people sending messages. So it's not really, right? If you're trying to say, yeah, this is all one big monopoly, they shouldn't be able to do it. And you're trying to prove that they're a monopoly to whom? To the consumer or to the producer? What they should be focusing on is saying that they're imposing harm on the producers. That's where all these monopolies, when they beat earnings every quarter, when they rip out some margin out of some imaginary place that you didn't think there was more margin to spare, where are they taking it from? They're taking it from the supplier, not the consumer. This thing is free to the consumer. They're taking it from the producer. And you see this all over the place. Facebook actually has the least amount of vertical integration. You know, when you look at other ad platform monopoly businesses like a Google, and you look at Google search, then it's very clear, right? Hey, if you're a hotel and you want to have your listings in the organic search results, well, good luck, because now the first like 2 pages of Google search are now all ads, and you got to pay the gatekeeper that is Google if you want to be a hotel that's still relevant, right? Perfect example, taking advantage of who? The producer. yeah, you could try and make the argument indirectly that that money gets passed on to the consumer. But who is receiving direct harm? Producers. Who does the monopoly have power over when you say, hey, as a channel, Google search has over 70% market share, or as a channel for social networking, Facebook has over 70% market share for social networking, whatever it is. So if I'm a business trying to get my message out there, if I'm a content creator who's been censored by the social network, right, that is a direct harm to my livelihood, right? And that's what the courts look at. So what you need to say is, hey, with Facebook buying Instagram, that's going to create more harm to who? Content creators. Because when Facebook censors you, now you're being censored off of Facebook and Instagram, and that's only going to hurt more of the livelihood, of content creators that have been unfairly censored and have their rights violated, and yada, 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 right? Something to that effect. Generally, these cases focus on the consumer rather than the producer. Or if they do focus on the producer, they're focusing on the producer and the consumer. And you just open yourself up to too much areas that the defendants, the tech monopoly lawyers who are extremely good and well paid, they'll pick away at this kind of stuff, right? They'll distract you about the consumer. You got to just stay focused. So I think eventually, these different states and regulators will figure this out, but it's certainly taken them some time. So that's on the bad news. On the good news side, Google hit with an antitrust lawsuit by 36 states alleging App Store monopoly. Okay, it's nice, but it's the App Store. Apple doesn't even know how much money they make on the App Store. So where does Google make all of its money? You want to really inflict harm on these tech monopolies? You got to go after the money. Where does Google make? Where does Google make all of its money? Maybe, oh yeah, Google search. And then kind of YouTube, but really Google search. But no, they want to go after the App Store. So, okay, it's good. It's one more thing for Google to worry about. Wonderful. Is this going to spoil the golden goose? No. Next thing, I think these both came out on the same day. House Republicans lay out their antitrust agenda for tech giants. So remember I spoke about, you have the House Judiciary Committee, which is chaired by a Democrat, and the Democrats released their report. And we read through it. We covered it. I think we actually live streamed some of the hearings last year. The Democrats then introduced a handful of bills, all with bipartisan support. I covered those on the show. Generally very positive on a lot of those. Some of the bills were overlapping, kind of to cover their bases. So they had kind of a couple overarching bills, and they had bills within that specifically drove home key points that were covered in the overarching bills. Generally, very good approach. Was maybe primarily sponsored by a Democrat, but also had a Republican supporting it. So you had kind of bipartisan support. And again, these bills have a long way to go before they're even introduced to the House floor. This is just the Judiciary Committee. And then from the House, then you got to get consensus in the House, and then you got to go to the Senate, and then the president. It's a long way away. Lots of lobbyists, lots of people with their hand out, who've already gotten their money. There is a long way to go. Expect these things to get watered down and many of them killed off. We'll see what makes it through, if anything. And don't worry, we'll be following it. So anyway, now the Republicans come out with their approach. And what their thing is really focused on is content censorship on Facebook and Google and other content platforms, right? Social media networks. They have some bit here on fast tracking cases in the court system, which is good. But the real thing is they're zeroing in on Section 230. They want to revise the Section 230 protection, which I think makes sense. But they did not introduce this with a Democrat support. So they just kind of introduced this as Republicans. And I think the reason why they're doing this is that they were saying they didn't see enough verbiage around removing Section 230 protection or decreasing Section 230 protection for these platforms in the bills that were brought forth by, primarily the Democrats in the House Judiciary Committee. So again, a valiant and appropriate direction and thing to fight for, which is that when you have the level of censorship that these content platforms are performing, are they still just a platform versus are they now a publisher? And I think that's the key thing ultimately, which is what this Republican proposal is trying to get at. There's a line here. Section 230 was here to allow platforms to take down content around like pornography, right? Not to be able to ban people because they're talking about where COVID came from or vaccine hesitancy or election fraud and all these kinds of things, right? This is America. You can still talk. You should still be able to talk about these things. Unfortunately, you can't because we've got 1984 thought police people employed by Facebook and Google. This is literally their job, regulate kind of the public discourse about these topics on their platforms. And it's a complete travesty to the entire value proposition of the platform business model. There is some moderation, which is appropriate in every platform, but they've taken what's appropriate, gone all the way to the end of the extreme, and then jumped off the cliff. It's not even close. So yes, they should be considered a publisher. They should be. They should have less of that liability and that shield from Section 230. So I think, again, all these things are valiant. They're all in the right direction. I'm not the one to say, will it work? And is this the right approach strategically from a legislation standpoint? And is it going to get through? But all these topics are in the right direction about different areas that we've seen big tech make very serious transgressions. And the problem is that, they make a small transgression. No one does anything about it. Then they make a bigger one and a bigger one and a bigger one. We've had people on the show talking about how YouTube's literally banned their entire crypto channel with hundreds of thousands of users, no warning, just gone. Not only is all the channel gone, all the videos were gone, all of the content gone. This is all over the spectrum. And we've clearly seen that this is no longer a kind of, a partisan thing. This is now at the root of what it means to be an American and have First Amendment privileges, which are being infringed upon every day by these big tech platforms, particularly the content platforms. Now, that's the other bit, which is President Trump announced his lawsuit against Facebook, Twitter, and Google. And then you had this guy, Alan Dershowitz, taught at Harvard Law School from 1964 through 2013, being hated by the media because he came out and said, this is the most important First Amendment case of the 21st century. It's important because it pits freedom of speech on the one hand against the First Amendment on the other hand. That may sound paradoxical, but remember, it's the high-tech giants that are banning freedom of speech. They are censoring, but they're claiming the right to do so under the First Amendment. So they're using the First Amendment as a sword against freedom of speech. That's why I call this the new censorship. And they're hiding under, Section 230 and a very loose interpretation about, what content is harmful and that they can then take down as a result. And the crazy thing is that strategically, it's actually, I think, a moronic decision. And you've now seen, just in the past few months, there are already many free speech content platform competitors. We've covered many of them on the show. Just in the past couple months, you've had now multiple new ones sprout up. People are smart in this country and they're waking up day by day. Many of them are already awake. Free speech and the ability to talk openly online is a key part of that. You got to be able to communicate. These tech platforms are going way beyond what you actually need to do from a legal standpoint to comply with say federal law or requests from the FBI or other agencies, right? I mean, the irony is that these social networks are winner take all, and it's not really a good thing to have like 5 or 10 different alternative free speech social networks. But eventually I think you will see these things consolidate, and there are different content models, right? More of like a Twitter style model, which is what Getter is, versus more of like a Facebook style model, which is what Gab is. Now, the irony is that, Getter, for example, has a mobile app on iOS and Android. But what we've seen is that eventually these alternative content platforms will be censored by other tech monopolies, right? Which happened to Parler, where their app was taken down. Then they were kicked off of AWS and all that. It literally killed the company. They had to get rid of their CEO and all this stuff, right? So we've seen not only big tech censor content creators within their walled garden, but now we've seen the other tech monopolies that don't have content platforms, that have development platforms, for example, similarly censor the alternative free speech content platform. So it's all of big tech ganging up on free speech, basically. So there are a myriad of arrows being cast against the big tech monopolies. A lot of these things are going to bounce off their armor. They got a lot of money and some pretty good armor. Some of them are going to make it through. And that's what's very exciting to see. And, we'll help you to decipher which ones are the really good arrows that have the right arc and are trending in the right direction to actually pierce the beast. Hi, I'm Alex. Thanks for watching the show. Make sure to hit that subscribe button, but even better, make sure to follow us on Odyssey, follow us on Rumble, and text us 203-646-5159. Text the word Monopoly. You'll be subscribed. You'll get updates about when we're going live, our latest videos, and we'll send you even a little goodie bag. And in the event that we all get banned from big tech, we'll still be connected.